Overcoming life's tough trials, lessons from Job. When life feels like one trial after another. Have you ever felt like life keeps knocking you down, one blow after another? Like just when you start to get back on your feet, another challenge comes crashing in, leaving you wondering if you'll ever catch a break. Maybe it's financial struggles, health issues, broken relationships, or the deep pain of losing someone you love. In those moments, it's easy to feel hopeless, as if you're drowning in problems with no way out. But what if I told you that even the darkest seasons of your life have a purpose? That the very trials you're facing right now could be shaping you for something greater? Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful and inspiring stories of endurance and faith, the story of Job. Job was a man who had everything: wealth, a loving family, and a strong faith. Yet, in the blink of an eye, he lost it all. His fortune vanished, his children were taken from him, and his health deteriorated so badly that even his closest friends barely recognized him. The pain he endured was unimaginable. And yet, despite his suffering, despite his questions, despite feeling abandoned, Job never turned away from his faith. He wrestled with his pain, he asked hard questions, but he never let go of hope. And in the end, his faith led him to something far greater than what he had before. So if you're struggling right now, don't lose heart. Stay with me, because this might just change the way you see suffering, and more importantly, how you overcome it. The story of Job, a man tested beyond limits. Job's story is one of the most powerful and thought-provoking accounts in history. It is not just a tale of suffering, but a lesson in endurance, faith, and divine purpose. To truly understand the depth of Job's trials, we need to step into his world, his life before disaster struck, the unimaginable losses he endured, and the resilience that carried him through the darkest of days. Job's life before the storm. Job was a man of great prosperity. He was not only wealthy but also deeply respected and admired. The Bible describes him as a man of integrity, someone who feared God and shunned evil. He had everything anyone could wish for: abundant livestock, a thriving household, and most importantly, a loving family. Job had 10 children who would often gather and celebrate together, a testament to the strong bond they shared. Beyond his material blessings, Job had something even more valuable: a relationship with God. He was a man of prayer and faith, regularly offering sacrifices on behalf of his children, just in case they had sinned. His devotion was unwavering, and he was known as a righteous man, not just in the eyes of people, but in the eyes of God himself. But then, everything changed. When the storm hit, Job loses everything. Job's life took a devastating turn, and it happened suddenly. Unbeknownst to him, a conversation had taken place in the heavens, one that would shake the very foundation of his life. Satan had approached God, claiming that Job was only faithful because he was blessed. He argued that if Job's blessings were stripped away, his faith would crumble. God, knowing Job's heart, allowed the test to unfold, but with one condition: Satan could take everything from Job, but he could not touch his life. What followed was a series of unimaginable tragedies. In a single day, messengers came to Job one after another, each delivering devastating news. His livestock, his wealth, was stolen or destroyed. His servants were killed. And worst of all, a mighty wind collapsed the house where his children were gathered, killing all 10 of them in an instant. Can you imagine the pain of losing all your children in one moment? The grief would be unbearable for any parent. Job, a man who had lived righteously, suddenly found himself in a nightmare beyond comprehension. But the suffering didn't stop there. Soon, his own health deteriorated. Painful sores covered his body from head to toe. The man who was once the pinnacle of strength and success was now reduced to sitting in ashes, scraping his wounds with broken pottery. His physical pain was excruciating, but perhaps even worse was the emotional and psychological torment he endured. When even loved ones turned against him. As if the loss of his family, wealth, and health weren't enough, Job faced another painful reality: isolation. His wife, the woman who had shared in his prosperity, now looked at him in disgust and despair. Rather than offering comfort, she told him to curse God and die, Job 2 verse 9. She had given up hope, and she wanted him to do the same. Then came his friends, 3 men who initially came to comfort him but quickly turned into accusers. They sat with him in silence for 7 days, overwhelmed by his suffering. But when they finally spoke, their words weren't of encouragement or understanding. Instead, they suggested that Job must have done something wrong to deserve such suffering. Surely, God wouldn't allow this unless you had sinned, they implied. Can you imagine? You're at the lowest point of your life, and instead of support, you're met with blame and judgment. Job had lost everything, his possessions, his family, his health, and now, he was losing the trust of his closest companions. But this is where Job's real story begins. Job's response, faith in the midst of darkness. Despite everything, Job did not curse God. Yes, he questioned. Yes, he wrestled with his pain. He cried out in anguish, even wishing he had never been born. He was brutally honest about his suffering, something many of us struggle to do. But here's what makes Job's story so powerful: he never turned his back on God. While his friends offered misguided advice, Job refused to accept the idea that his suffering was simply punishment for sin. He knew he had been faithful. He knew that life wasn't always black and white. And most importantly, he knew that God was bigger than his pain. One of the most profound moments in Job's journey comes when he declares, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." Job 13 verse 15. Think about that for a moment. Even when he felt abandoned, even when he couldn't understand why he was suffering, Job still held on to his faith. How many of us can say the same? The restoration, Job's reward for enduring. Job's suffering wasn't the end of his story. In time, God responded. After Job had endured the test, after he had refused to give up, God restored him. His health was healed. His wealth was doubled. He was blessed with 10 more children. And most importantly, he gained something far greater, an even deeper understanding of God's wisdom and sovereignty. Job came to realize that some things in life are beyond human comprehension. He learned that even in suffering, God is still in control. And perhaps most powerfully, he learned that faith isn't about having all the answers, it's about trusting, even when we don't. What can we learn from Job? Job's story isn't just an ancient tale, it's a message for all of us. Life is unpredictable. We will face trials that seem unfair, moments when we question why bad things happen to good people. But Job teaches us that our suffering has purpose. Hold on to faith, even when life doesn't make sense. Be honest with God about your struggles, He can handle it. Not all suffering is punishment, sometimes, it's preparation. Your trials don't define you, how you respond does. Restoration is possible, even after the darkest storms. If you're going through a tough season, take heart. Like Job, your story isn't over yet. The pain you're facing today might just be setting you up for a greater testimony tomorrow. Keep the faith. Your breakthrough is coming. Why do good people suffer? A lesson from Job's story. One of the most difficult questions in life is, why do good people suffer? It's a question that has puzzled humanity for centuries. If someone is kind, honest, and faithful, shouldn't their life be free from hardship? Shouldn't doing the right thing lead to peace and prosperity? And yet, we see suffering all around us, innocent children battling illness, hardworking people losing their jobs, good families being torn apart, and faithful believers facing relentless trials. It feels unfair. It feels confusing. But what if suffering isn't always a punishment? What if it's not about what we've done wrong, but about something much deeper, something beyond what we can see? The hidden battle behind Job's suffering. Job was a man who lived with integrity. He feared God and turned away from evil. He wasn't just a good person, he was exceptional. He prayed regularly, cared for his family, and lived a life of faith. If anyone deserved a life free of suffering, it was Job. But Job had no idea that something was happening behind the scenes, something that had nothing to do with his actions, but everything to do with a spiritual battle. In the opening chapters of the book of Job, we get a rare glimpse into the unseen realm. Satan comes before God and challenges him, claiming that Job is only faithful because of his blessings. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan asks. Take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Job 1 verses 9 to 11. Satan believed that Job's faith was shallow, that it was only based on what he could get from God. If Job lost everything, Satan argued, he would turn his back on God. And so, God allowed the test. He permitted Job to suffer, not because Job had done anything wrong, but because his faith was being put to the ultimate test. What if your struggles are a test, not a punishment? This is where we need to pause and ask ourselves, what if our trials aren't about punishment, but about how we respond when life goes wrong? So often, when we face difficulties, we immediately wonder, what did I do to deserve this? We assume that suffering means we've failed or that God is angry with us. But Job's story reminds us that suffering isn't always a consequence of wrongdoing. Sometimes, it's a test, a divine opportunity to prove our faith, refine our character, and grow in ways we never imagined. Think about gold. Before it becomes valuable and pure, it must go through intense fire. The impurities must be burned away. The same is true for us. Faith that has never been tested cannot be trusted. If we only trust God when life is easy, is that really faith? How do we respond when life falls apart? When Job lost everything, his wealth, his children, and even his health, he was devastated. He grieved. He questioned. He cried out to God. But he never turned away from him. In Job 1 verse 21, he says something truly incredible, the Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord. Even in his pain, Job chose to worship. He didn't understand why he was suffering, but he still trusted God. Compare that to how many of us react when we go through trials. Do we praise God when things don't go our way? Do we hold on to our faith, or do we walk away in frustration? Job's story teaches us that our response to suffering is more important than the suffering itself. The danger of wrong thinking, Job's friends versus reality. When Job's friends came to comfort him, they made a critical mistake. Instead of encouraging him, they assumed he was suffering because of sin. Surely, you must have done something wrong, they told him. God wouldn't let this happen unless you deserved it. How often do we think the same way? How often do we assume that bad things only happen to bad people? But Job's suffering wasn't a punishment, it was a test. A spiritual battle was happening behind the scenes, and Job's response was proving Satan wrong. If you are facing suffering today, don't fall into the trap of thinking, God must be punishing me. Instead, ask yourself, what is God teaching me through this? The purpose in your pain. By the end of Job's story, we see something beautiful. After enduring the test, Job's faith was stronger than ever. He had a new understanding of God's greatness. And in the end, God restored him, blessing him with twice as much as he had before. This doesn't mean every trial will end with material blessings, but it does mean that God never wastes our suffering. Whether we see it in this life or the next, every hardship has a purpose. So, what can we learn from Job? Suffering is not always a punishment. Just because you are going through a tough time doesn't mean you did something wrong. Some of the greatest tests come to the most faithful people. There is a spiritual battle behind the scenes. Just like Job, you may not see what's happening in the unseen realm. Your faithfulness in hard times could be proving something far greater than you realize. How you respond matters more than the trial itself. Your reaction to suffering is what defines your faith. Will you cling to God, or will you walk away? God is always in control, even when we don't understand. Job never got an explanation for why he suffered. But he learned to trust that God's wisdom is beyond human understanding. Sometimes, we won't get all the answers, but we can still trust the one who holds them. Restoration is possible. God is a redeemer. No matter how broken things may seem, He can bring healing, restoration, and new purpose from even the darkest trials. Your test is temporary. If you are struggling today, remember this: your story isn't over. Just as Job's suffering had a purpose, so does yours. Hold on. Keep trusting. The test may be hard, but what's waiting on the other side is worth it. Faith isn't about having all the answers, it's about trusting when you don't. Even when life doesn't make sense, God is still in control. So, the next time you ask, why do good people suffer? Remember Job's story. Sometimes, suffering isn't about what we've done wrong, but about how we respond when things go wrong. Your breakthrough is coming. Job's unshakable faith, a lesson in trusting God through suffering. When life falls apart, how do we respond? Do we turn our backs on God, consumed by bitterness and despair? Or do we hold on to faith, even when everything seems hopeless? Job's story is one of the greatest examples of perseverance and unwavering trust in God. He lost everything: his wealth, his health, and his family. His body was covered in painful sores, his wife told him to give up, and his friends accused him of wrongdoing. Yet, through it all, Job never cursed God. He didn't understand why he was suffering, but he refused to let bitterness take over. And because of that, his faith was rewarded in ways he never could have imagined. Let's take a deeper look at Job's resilience, the power of faith in suffering, and the incredible lessons his story teaches us about trusting God through life's hardest trials. Job's choice: bitterness or trust. After losing everything, Job had every reason to be angry. He could have let his pain turn into resentment. He could have walked away from his faith. In fact, his wife even encouraged him to do just that. Curse God and die, she told him, Job 2 verse 9. She had lost hope. She saw no reason to continue trusting in a God who had allowed such suffering. And from a human perspective, it's understandable. When we suffer, it's natural to ask, why is this happening to me? Where is God in all of this? What did I do to deserve this? But Job made a different choice. Instead of letting his suffering drive him away from God, he held on even tighter. His response to his wife's suggestion was powerful: shall we accept good from God, and not trouble? Job 2 verse 10. Even though he was in unbearable pain, he understood something most people miss: faith isn't just about trusting God when life is good, it's about trusting Him when everything falls apart. When faith is tested, it grows stronger. Job's suffering wasn't a punishment for sin, it was a test of faith. And the truth is, faith that is never tested cannot be trusted. Think of it like this: when a muscle is exercised, it stretches, tears, and rebuilds itself stronger. The same happens with faith. It's in the trials, the losses, and the unanswered prayers that true faith is formed. Job's faith was tested in the deepest way possible. He wrestled with his pain. He questioned God. He didn't pretend everything was okay. But in the end, he never turned his back on God. And that made all the difference. The reward of Job's faith. Because Job remained faithful, God restored everything he had lost, and even more. His wealth was doubled. He had 10 more children. His health was restored. He lived a long, full life, blessed beyond measure. But here's the most important part: Job's greatest blessing wasn't his restored wealth or health, it was his deeper understanding of God. At the end of his journey, Job said something incredible: "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Job 42 verse 5. Before his suffering, Job knew about God. But after walking through pain, he had a personal encounter with God that changed him forever. This is what suffering does: it takes our faith from something we've heard about to something we've truly experienced. So, what can we learn from Job's unwavering faith? Pain is temporary, but faith is eternal. No matter how dark things seem, suffering doesn't last forever. It may feel endless in the moment, but God's restoration is always greater than the pain we endure. Faith is what carries us through. Trusting God doesn't mean you'll understand everything. Job never got a full explanation for why he suffered. But he learned to trust God's wisdom even when he didn't have all the answers. Sometimes, we don't need an explanation, we just need faith. Your response to suffering shapes your future. Bitterness leads to destruction, but faith leads to restoration. How you respond to trials determines whether you'll grow or remain stuck in pain. God is always working behind the scenes. Even when we don't see it, God is working for our good. Job had no idea about the conversation between God and Satan. He didn't know that his suffering was proving something far greater. Your pain has a purpose, even if you don't see it yet. Restoration is coming. God didn't just bring Job back to where he was, he doubled his blessings. This doesn't mean every suffering person will get their riches back, but it does mean that God never wastes our pain. Whether in this life or the next, redemption is always part of God's plan. What about you? How will you respond? Right now, you might be going through your own job season. Maybe you've lost something, your job, your health, a loved one, or even your sense of purpose. Maybe you feel abandoned, questioning why God has allowed this to happen. The truth is, we all face seasons of hardship. But the real question is, how will you respond? Will you let bitterness take over? Will you walk away from your faith? Or will you, like Job, hold on even when you don't understand? Remember this, suffering is temporary, but faith is eternal. Your story isn't over. The pain you feel today is shaping something greater in you. And just like Job, your breakthrough is coming. Keep the faith. If you're struggling today, hold on. Keep trusting. Keep believing. The night may be dark, but the dawn is coming. Your pain has a purpose. Your faith is being strengthened. And in the end, you'll come out stronger than you ever imagined. Job's story isn't just about suffering, it's about faith that overcomes. And if he made it through, so can you. If this message encouraged you, share it with someone who needs hope today. And remember, your story isn't over yet. Finding purpose in your struggles, a lesson from Job. When we go through pain, it's easy to feel like life is unfair. The question that often comes to mind is, why me? Why do I have to go through this? Why is this happening to me? Why is life so hard? But what if I told you that your struggles have meaning? That the pain you're facing right now isn't random, it's shaping you, refining you, and preparing you for something greater? What if, like Job, your breakthrough is just around the corner? Instead of asking, why me, try asking, what can I learn from this? Because the truth is, your story isn't over yet. The purpose behind your pain. Pain is something we all experience. No one is exempt from suffering, and sometimes, the hardest battles come to the best people. It doesn't seem fair, does it? But what if we're looking at suffering the wrong way? What if pain isn't just something to be endured, but something that has a greater purpose? Think about this, every great person in history has faced hardship. Every strong leader, every successful entrepreneur, every person who has made an impact in this world has walked through difficult seasons. Struggles don't mean you're failing, they mean you're growing. The story of Job is the perfect example of this. Job was a man of great faith, integrity, and success. He had everything, wealth, family, and good health. But then, in a moment, he lost it all. His livestock, his servants, his home, his children, everything was taken from him. And on top of that, his body was covered in painful sores. Job had every reason to ask, why me? But instead of turning away from God, he chose to trust, even when he didn't understand. And in the end, Job's faith was rewarded. Not only was everything restored, but he gained a deeper understanding of God and life than he had ever known before. His story teaches us that pain is temporary, but faith is eternal. What if your pain is preparing you? Have you ever considered that your pain might be preparation? That the struggles you're facing today are shaping you for something bigger than you can see? Let's think about some real-life examples. A student struggling through sleepless nights of studying might feel overwhelmed, but that hardship is preparing them for a successful career. An athlete pushing through exhaustion and pain in training might want to quit, but that struggle is building the strength needed for victory. A parent working 2 jobs to provide for their family might feel exhausted, but that sacrifice is shaping a better future for their children. In every situation, struggle leads to growth. And when we look at our struggles this way, we realize that pain is not the end, it's part of the process. Maybe right now, you feel like you're stuck. You feel like your prayers aren't being answered, and you don't see a way out. But what if your breakthrough is closer than you think? What if everything you're going through right now is necessary to prepare you for what's next? Don't give up just because you don't understand the process. Changing the question, from, why me, to, what can I learn? When we go through difficulties, our first instinct is to ask, why me? But that question rarely gives us an answer. Instead, it can lead to frustration, bitterness, and even a sense of hopelessness. But what if we change the question? Instead of asking, why is this happening to me, try asking, what can I learn from this? This simple shift in mindset can change everything. Instead of feeling like a victim, you become a student. Instead of focusing on the problem, you start looking for growth. Instead of dwelling on what's wrong, you start searching for what's next. This is exactly what Job did. Even in his suffering, he sought wisdom. He questioned, he wrestled with his faith, but he never stopped searching for the deeper meaning behind his trials. And in the end, his perspective was transformed. Pain is often the greatest teacher. The lessons we learn in our hardest moments are the ones that shape us the most. So, what is your struggle teaching you? Patience? Perseverance? Compassion for others? Trusting God even when life doesn't make sense? Whatever it is, embrace the lesson. Because your story isn't over yet. Your breakthrough is closer than you think. One of the greatest deceptions of suffering is the belief that it will never end. When we're in pain, it feels like it will last forever. But that's not true. The night may be dark, but the morning always comes. Job didn't see his restoration while he was suffering. He had no idea that God was about to bless him beyond his wildest dreams. But he kept trusting, even when things seemed hopeless. And the same is true for you. Your breakthrough could be just around the corner. The opportunity you've been waiting for might be closer than you think. The healing you've been praying for might be on its way. The strength you need to overcome might already be growing inside you. But if you quit now, you'll never see it. Don't give up. Keep going. Keep believing. Keep trusting. Your story is still being written, and the best chapters are yet to come. Keep moving forward. If you take one thing away from Job's story, let it be this: pain is not the end of your story. The struggles you face today are not meaningless. They are shaping you, refining you, and preparing you for something greater. So the next time you face a challenge, don't ask, why me? Instead, ask, what is this teaching me? How is this making me stronger? What does God want me to learn from this? Because when you change your perspective, you change your life. And remember, your story isn't over yet. The best is yet to come. If this message spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Someone out there is struggling right now, someone who feels lost, alone, or like their situation will never get better. You never know how one small act of sharing could give them the hope they need to keep going. Hit that like button if this message resonated with you. It helps more people find this video and be encouraged. And if you know someone who could use a little inspiration today, share this with them. You might be the reason they find strength to face another day. If you haven't already, subscribe for more uplifting messages about faith, perseverance, and personal growth. Let's build a community where we support and uplift each other, reminding one another that no one has to go through life's struggles alone. But I don't just want this to be a one-way conversation, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. What's one lesson you've learned from a tough time in your life? Maybe you discovered new strength within yourself. Maybe you found deeper faith, greater patience, or a fresh perspective on what truly matters. Whatever it is, your story could inspire someone else who needs to hear it. Let's talk in the comments and encourage one another. You never know, your words might be exactly what someone else needs today. Remember, you are stronger than you think, and your story isn't over yet.